The Galactic Empire's attack had been swift and unrelenting. Earth's outer military outposts, once symbols of humanity's reach into the stars, were now nothing more than charred husks scattered across the void. The smell of scorched metal and the faint, acrid tang of burned ozone lingered even in the sterilized confines of the command ship as General Adam Warner reviewed the footage. He watched in silence as the screens replayed scenes of devastation. Planetary defenses overwhelmed, soldiers vaporized by plasma strikes, and the cries of the wounded drowned out by the mechanical hum of enemy war machines. The room around him was deathly quiet, save for the faint beeping of instruments. Warner's steel-gray eyes reflected none of the anguish he felt. There was no room for emotion in moments like these. It was a luxury he had long since abandoned. His hands, calloused from years of combat, rested on the edge of the table as he leaned forward, replaying the feed of the last outpost fall. "General, we've lost contact with the Lunar Ridge base," said Commander Raphael Trent, his voice tight with controlled anger. A younger officer, Trent's usually confident demeanor was shaken. The Empire's latest assault had been calculated, precise. There had been no warning, no opportunity for evacuation. Warner didn't look up. Casualties? All hands presumed lost, sir. Over 75,000 personnel across all sites. Trent paused, his fists clenched at his sides. They broadcasted the executions. Every single one. The weight of the numbers hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Warner closed his eyes briefly, his mind involuntarily conjuring the faces of those he had sent to those outposts. Young men and women who had trusted in his leadership. He exhaled slowly, suppressing the flood of guilt that threatened to break through his stoic facade. "They wanted us to see," Warner said, his voice low and measured. "This isn't just war, it's a message. They believe we're broken." Trent's jaw tightened. "Then they don't know us." For the first time, Warner looked up, his gaze meeting Trent's. "No, they don't." The door to the command room slid open with a faint hiss, and an older man stepped in. Director Marcus Harlan, the head of Earth's clandestine defense initiatives, exuded an air of authority even in the midst of chaos. His sharp features were partially obscured by the holographic display he carried, its glowing interface projecting schematics and data that pulsed with a faint blue light. "General," Harlan began without preamble, "it's time." Warner straightened. "Project Iron Shadows?" Harlan nodded, stepping closer to the table and gesturing for the hologram to sync with the central display. Instantly, the room was bathed in a luminous map of Earth's most classified undertaking. Dozens of points of data highlighted the details. Nanotechnology integration, bio-enhanced combat suits, neural synchronization interfaces. "This is our answer to the Empire," Harlan said, his tone clipped. "A strike force unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. You handpicked the candidates yourself. Soldiers capable of adapting to any combat scenario, trained to operate beyond human limitations. We've been holding them back, waiting for the right moment. That moment is now." Warner's gaze flicked to the schematics, but his mind was already running through the faces of the men he had selected for the program. Each one a legend in their own right. Each one carrying scars, both visible and unseen, from wars that had forged them into something more than mere soldiers. They were humanity's best, and now they would become something else entirely. Trent stepped closer to the display, studying the data with furrowed brows. "With respect, Director, deploying them now, are they ready? The Empire's forces are overwhelming, and if we lose them..." Harlan cut him off with a sharp look. "The question isn't whether they're ready. The question is whether we can afford to wait. The Empire believes we're on our knees. This is our chance to show them what happens when they underestimate us." Warner raised a hand, silencing both men. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen more battles than he cared to count. "Enough. This isn't a debate." He turned to Harlan. "Begin deployment procedures. I want them operational within 24 hours. Harlan nodded, his expression unreadable as he exited the room. The hum of the command room seemed louder now. Trent hesitated, then spoke. "Sir, if I may, what's the objectives?" Warner's eyes hardened. "Revenge." The word hung in the air like a challenge, daring the universe to defy it. Hours later, Warner stood in the cavernous depths of the deployment bay. The air thrummed with energy as technicians worked tirelessly, calibrating the sleek black combat suits that would transform their wearers into weapons of war. The soldiers themselves were gathered in a tight circle, their faces grim but resolute. Among them was Captain Aaron Finch, a sharpshooter whose reputation for precision bordered on the mythic. Beside him stood Lieutenant Marcus Hale, an explosives expert with a penchant for turning even the most desperate situations to his advantage. Sergeant Caleb Jewell, the team's heavy weapons specialist, adjusted the fit of his suit, his massive frame casting a shadow over the others. And finally, Corporal Nathan Jones, the youngest of the team but already a seasoned close-quarters fighter, his eyes burning with quiet intensity. Warner stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate silence. "You've all seen what they've done," he began, his voice steady. "They think we're beaten. They think they've broken us. But they've only given us clarity. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about making them understand that humanity is not a force to be crushed." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the team. "You are iron shadows. You will move unseen, strike without warning, and leave nothing behind but fear and ashes. Each of you is chosen because you are the best at what you do. Now, you will become something more." The soldiers exchanged nods, their expressions hardening with resolve. "We don't stop," Warner continued, his voice rising. "Not until every Imperial stronghold is ash. Not until the galaxy knows that Earth fights back." A moment of silence followed, broken only by the hum of the suits coming online. Then, one by one, the soldiers stepped forward, their movements precise and purposeful as they began the final synchronization process with their new gear. Warner watched, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. This was it, the beginning of their reckoning. As the first soldier's suit powered up, casting an eerie glow across the bay, Warner felt the weight of the galaxy's expectations pressing down on him. But he also felt something else. Hope. For the first time since the Empire's attack, there was a flicker of belief that they could fight back, that they could win. And if the Empire thought otherwise, they were about to learn the cost of their arrogance. The silence of space was broken only by the faint hum of engines as the stealth craft slipped through the Empire's defenses, invisible to their sensors. Inside the cramped cockpit, Captain Aaron Finch adjusted the visor of his adaptive helmet, the heads-up display feeding him a constant stream of data. Coordinates, atmospheric conditions, enemy placements, all seamlessly integrated into his vision. His pulse was steady, his breathing controlled. He was a predator, and the hunt was about to begin. Beside him, Lieutenant Marcus Hale double-checked the synchronization of his combat suit systems. The faint blue glow of nanotech interfaces danced along the surface of his forearm as he calibrated the suit's adaptive response matrix. "I don't like how quiet it is," Hale muttered, his voice filtered through the comms. "That's the point," Finch replied without looking away from his display. In the rear compartment, Sergeant Caleb Jewell secured the last of the team's heavy gear, his massive hands moving with practiced ease. "We've trained for this. Don't let nerves get in the way." His deep voice carried the weight of a man who had seen his share of battles and survived them all. "I'm not nervous," Corporal Nathan Jones shot back, his tone sharper than intended. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his combat knife in hand, spinning it idly. "Just focused." "Good," came General Warner's voice over the comms. He was monitoring the operation from the command ship, his presence a constant reminder of the stakes. Because focus is the difference between survival and failure. The mission was clear. Infiltrate the Imperial supply hub orbiting the gas giant Torath and disable its logistics network. The station was a critical node in the Empire's war machine, supplying fleets across the sector. Taking it out wouldn't just slow their momentum. It would send a message that humanity was no longer a passive target. As the craft approached the station, its sleek frame blending seamlessly into the shadows of the massive structure. Warner's voice crackled through the comms again. "You've got one chance. Make it count." Finch's hand hovered over the release mechanism for the docking clamps. "We will." With a hiss of decompression, the team disembarked into the void. Magnetic clamps in their boots secured them to the station's surface as they moved with fluid precision. The bio-enhanced combat suits adjusted automatically to the environment, their black surfaces absorbing and refracting light to render them nearly invisible. Finch took point, his visor mapping out the station's exterior in real time. "Hale, you're on the mainframe. Jewel, secure the armory. Jones, with me to disable the reactors. Move fast, move quiet." The team split off into the darkness, each soldier a ghost. Inside the station, Imperial forces went about their routines, oblivious to the shadows creeping through their halls. Hale reached the mainframe first, a towering structure bristling with conduits and data relays. He placed a hand on the interface, his suit's nanotech linking with the system. "Uploading the virus now," Hale whispered, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. Alarms flashed momentarily on his visor, signaling attempts by the station's AI to counter the intrusion. But Hale was faster, his suit's adaptive algorithms outpacing the Imperial defenses. "Virus is live," he reported, stepping back as the mainframe began to overload. Sparks erupted from the conduits, and the lights in the corridor flickered ominously. In the armory, Jewel moved methodically, placing high-yield explosives at strategic points. He paused only once, his eyes narrowing as a pair of guards entered the room. They were speaking in hushed tones, their alien voices guttural and harsh. Jewel didn't hesitate. He activated his suit's silent mode and moved behind the nearest guard, dispatching him with a swift blow to the neck. The second guard turned, his expression one of shock that barely had time to register before Jewel's combat blade found its mark. "Armory rigged," Jewel grunted into the comms, his voice calm despite the carnage around him. Meanwhile, Finch and Jones navigated the labyrinthine passages leading to the reactor core. The air was thick with the metallic tang of coolant, and the hum of machinery reverberated through the walls. "Two guards at the entrance," Jones whispered, his combat knife already in hand. Finch nodded, signaling for a synchronized takedown. In perfect unison, they struck, the guards dropping soundlessly to the floor. As they entered the reactor chamber, Finch's visor lit up with warnings. The room was heavily monitored, with automated turrets scanning for intruders. Disabling the defenses, Jones said, moving to a nearby console. His fingers flew over the controls, bypassing the security protocols with a speed that belied his age. The turrets powered down, and Finch approached the reactor, placing a series of charges around its base. "This is going to make a hell of a bang," he muttered. "Good," Jones replied, stepping back as Finch finished arming the explosives. "They deserve it." The team regrouped at the extraction point, their movements synchronized like clockwork. Behind them, the station was already showing signs of disarray. Alarms blared, and Imperial soldiers scrambled to contain the chaos. "We're clear," Finch reported as the stealth craft docked. "Not yet," Warner's voice came through, colder than usual. "They'll know it was us. We can't leave witnesses." Finch exchanged a glance with Jewel, who simply nodded. The unspoken understanding passed between them, a harsh necessity of war. Hale activated the station's comms, broadcasting a looping signal that masked their departure. "Signal's live." They'll think it's interference until it's too late. As the team boarded the craft, Finch gave the final order. "Detonate." The explosion ripped through the station with terrifying force, the shockwave visible even from the cockpit as they sped away. Finch watched the destruction unfold, his expression unreadable. "It's done," Jones said quietly, his voice tinged with both satisfaction and exhaustion. "No!" Warner's voice interjected, sharp and unyielding. "This is just the beginning." The stealth craft disappeared into the blackness of space, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. As the team sat in silence, each man grappling with the weight of what they had done, Finch finally spoke. "They'll come for us now." "They've been coming for us," Hale replied, leaning back in his seat. "We're just hitting back." In the distance, the faint glow of the Empire's fleet began to materialize on their sensors. The chase was on, and there was no turning back. For the first time in years, humanity was taking the fight to their oppressors. The shadows had struck, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Imperial Senate chamber buzzed with tension as the holographic projections of sector commanders flickered to life, their faces strained with worry. Over the past weeks, the once unshakable Empire had been plagued by a relentless and unseen enemy. Key installations fell one by one, their losses marked by catastrophic explosions and encrypted messages signed with a simple phrase, "Iron Shadows." At the center of the chamber, Emperor Kael Varro stood tall, his golden armor glinting under the harsh lights. His crimson cape billowed slightly as he turned to address his advisors. "These attacks are not random acts of defiance," he growled, his deep voice carrying the weight of his anger. "They are calculated strikes against our lifelines. I want answers." High Commander Orthus, a towering figure with scarred skin and a mechanical arm, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we believe the humans have activated some kind of advanced strike force. Their technology is unlike anything we've encountered, adaptive, precise, and devastating." Varros's piercing gaze fell on the commander. "How have they managed this? The humans were supposed to be broken, scattered." "Explain." Before Orthus could respond, a young officer interrupted, his voice trembling. "Sire, another report from Sector 12. The refueling depot at Tryon 6, it's gone. Completely destroyed." The room fell silent, the weight of the news pressing down like a physical force. Varros clenched his fists, his golden gauntlets creaking under the strain. This is no longer an insurgency. This is war, far from the opulent halls of the Empire's heart. General Adam Warner watched the chaos he had unleashed unfold from the shadows of his mobile command center. The room was dimly lit, filled with the hum of advanced systems, tracking Imperial movements. A tactical map projected onto the table showed blinking red icons, targets already eliminated, and clusters of yellow markers indicating high-value objectives yet to be struck. "Tryon 6 was textbook," Warner said, his voice steady. "The Empire's losing its grip. We keep this up, and they'll be fighting blind within a month." Captain Finch, standing at the general's side, studied the map. "They're starting to adjust their tactics, though. Reinforcements are moving faster, and they've tightened their security protocols." "They'll adapt," Warner admitted, his eyes narrowing. "But they won't be fast enough. We've planned for this." Nearby, Hale worked tirelessly at a console, his fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "Intercepted another transmission," he announced. "They're calling for a full fleet mobilization in the Arcara system. Looks like they're trying to regroup." "Then we hit them there," Warner said decisively. "We can't give them time to consolidate." "What about the civilians in Arcaris?" Jewel asked, his deep voice cutting through the room. "That system's full of mining colonies. Innocents caught in the crossfire." Warner's jaw tightened, and he looked away for a moment before responding. "We minimize collateral damage where we can. But this isn't a clean war, Sergeant. If we hesitate, we lose." Jewel nodded solemnly, though the unease lingered in his eyes. The room fell into a focused silence as the team prepared for their next move. Deep within the Arcara system, Imperial forces were scrambling to secure their position. Massive cruisers floated in formation above the mining colonies, their gun batteries scanning the void for any sign of attack. Inside the command center of the flagship Dominion, Admiral Kestrel paced, his nerves frayed. "Status on the defensive grid," he demanded. "Operational, sir," a technician replied, his voice trembling. "But these humans, they've bypassed grids like this before." "Then we'll make sure they don't get the chance," Kestrel snapped. "Double the patrols. I want every sector scanned, But even as he spoke, the shadows crept closer. The iron shadows had already infiltrated the system, their stealth craft blending seamlessly into the blackness of space. Finch's team was among them, their adaptive suits calibrating to the electromagnetic signatures of the fleet to avoid detection. As they approached the Dominion, Finch's voice came through the comms. "This is it. Take out the flagship, and the rest will fall apart. Let's make it count," Jones replied, his tone sharper than usual. The infiltration was surgical. They entered through a maintenance hatch on the ship's underside, bypassing the automated security systems with a combination of hacking and brute force. Once inside, the team moved with lethal precision, neutralizing guards and disabling systems without raising an alarm. Finch led the way to the reactor core, his visor displaying a real-time layout of the ship. "Jones, you're on Overwatch. Jewel, cover the entrance. Hale with me." As Hale worked to disable the reactor's fail-safes, the ship's alarms suddenly blared to life. The comms crackled with a warning. "Enemy detected on board." "They found the bodies," Jewel said grimly, positioning himself at the entrance. "Keep them off us," Finch ordered, his voice calm despite the rising tension. Imperial soldiers poured into the corridors, their footsteps echoing through the ship. Jewel held his ground, his heavy weapon spitting rounds that tore through the narrow passageways. Behind him, Hale finished his work, and the reactor began to destabilize. "We need to move," Hale urged, stepping back as the room filled with a dangerous hum. "Go!" Finch barked, firing a volley to cover their retreat. The team fought their way through the ship, the corridors now a chaotic battlefield. As they reached the extraction point, Jones turned, his eyes narrowing. "Go on without me. I'll hold them here." "Not a chance," Finch snapped, grabbing him by the arm. "You'll never make it if we all go," Jones argued, his voice firm. "I can buy you time." For a brief moment, Finch hesitated. Then he nodded, his jaw tight. "Don't let it be for nothing." Jones smiled grimly. "It won't be." As the team boarded their craft, Jones turned back to face the oncoming soldiers, his weapon raised. He fought with the ferocity of a man who knew he wouldn't see another sunrise, his defiance a beacon in the darkness. The explosion tore through the Dominion, the shockwaves sending debris scattering across the void. From their craft, Finch and the others watched in silence, the weight of their losses pressing down on them. Jones knew what he was doing. Warner's voice came through, a cold reassurance. "And so do we. The Empire is unraveling, piece by piece. We can't stop now." Finch nodded, his expression hard. "We won't." As the debris settled, the realization hit the Empire with devastating clarity. This wasn't a rebellion. This was annihilation, and the iron shadows wouldn't stop until the galaxy was free or burned to ash. The imperial capital loomed ahead, a sprawling city encased in a planetary shield, its surface glittering with golden spires and intricate defense systems. It was a testament to the Empire's arrogance, a fortress built on the assumption of eternal dominance. But today, its invulnerability would be tested. General Adam Warner stood at the helm of the Iron Resolute, the flagship of humanity's fleet. Through the wide viewport, he observed the capital world as his officers worked around him, their voices steady despite the tension. "This is it," Warner said, his tone carrying both resolve and weariness. "Everything we've fought for leads to this moment. Either we finish this, or we fall." Captain Finch stepped forward, his face grim. "The shield won't hold under sustained bombardment from our orbital cannons. Once it drops, we'll deploy the shadows to secure critical objectives and pave the way for ground forces." "Good," Warner replied, turning to his team. "Remember, we're not just fighting for revenge. We're fighting to make sure no one else has to live under the Empire's boot." The battle began with a coordinated strike. Human dreadnoughts unleashed salvo after salvo of energy beams at the planetary shield, their massive cannons roaring with each shot. The Empire's fleet responded in kind, their fighters and cruisers swarming like angry hornets. The void lit up with streaks of plasma and explosions as ships from both sides were torn apart. On the bridge of the Iron Resolute, alarms blared as enemy fighters broke through the defensive perimeter. Shields down to 78%, an officer reported, her voice strained. Divert power from non-critical systems, Warner ordered. Keep us in the fight. Below the chaos in orbit, the planetary shield began to flicker, its energy field destabilizing under the relentless assault. When it finally collapsed, a cheer erupted across the human fleet. Deploy the shadows, Warner commanded. Make it count. Finch led the strike team as they descended through the atmosphere in stealth pods, their adaptive suits blending seamlessly with the smoky sky. The Empire's capital was a labyrinth of towering buildings and narrow streets, its defenses now scrambling to counter the infiltration. Target is the central command hub. Finch briefed his team over the comms. Take it out and we cripple their coordination. The squad moved with practiced precision, their nanotech-enhanced suits allowing them to scale walls and leap across rooftops. Imperial troops patrolling the streets fell quickly and silently, their weapons useless against the Shadow's advanced tactics. As they approached the command hub, resistance grew fiercer. Automated turrets and heavily armored soldiers blocked their path, forcing the Shadows to employ every tool at their disposal. Hale hacked into the security grid, turning the turrets against their own troops, while Jewel used his sheer strength to breach reinforced barriers. Inside the command hub, Emperor Kale Varos watched the chaos unfold on a massive holo display. His advisors pleaded for retreat, but the Emperor's pride burned brighter than his fear. They think they can topple the Empire with tricks and shadows, Varos snarled. I'll show them the true meaning of power. Activating a hidden override, Varos unleashed the Empire's last line of defense, the Titan Protocol. Across the city, massive war machines buried beneath the surface began to rise, their towering forms armed with devastating weaponry. The ground trembled as the first Titan emerged, its cannons firing indiscriminately into the city. Finch's team barely avoided being crushed by the chaos. What the hell is that? Jewel shouted, his voice filled with both awe and anger. A problem, Finch replied sharply. Hale, can you find a weakness? Already working on it, Hale said, his hands flying across his interface. These things have a central core. Take it out and they're done. Then we split up, Finch decided. Jewel, Jones, take one Titan. Hell, you're with me. Let's bring these bastards down. The battle against the Titans was brutal. Their sheer size and firepower forced the Shadows to adapt on the fly, using the environment to their advantage. Jewel and Jones lured one machine into a narrow street, its massive frame unable to maneuver. Using explosives, they brought a building down onto it, crushing the core beneath tons of rubble. Meanwhile, Finch and Hale scaled another Titan, their suits magnetizing to its surface. Dodging automated defenses, they planted charges on the core and detonated it from within, leaping clear just as the machine collapsed in a fiery explosion. With the Titans neutralized, the Shadows regrouped at the base of the Imperial Palace. Warner's voice came through the comms, steady despite the chaos. You've done your part. Now it's my turn. From orbit, the Iron Resolute unleashed its final weapon, a concentrated orbital strike aimed directly at the palace. The ground shook as the palace's defenses crumbled, its golden spires reduced to molten slag. But Varos was not defeated so easily. Emerging from the wreckage, he faced Warner's forces clad in a massive exosuit, its glowing power core pulsing with energy. The Emperor's voice boomed through the battlefield. You think you can take my throne? Come and try. Warner himself descended to the surface, his combat suit gleaming with adaptive nanotech. As he approached Varos, the battlefield seemed to fall silent. The two leaders locked in a moment of mutual hatred. You took everything from us, Warner said, his voice cold. Your empire ends here. Varos laughed, the sound echoing through his suit speakers. You're nothing but an insect, scurrying to survive. I am the galaxy's rightful ruler. The clash was titanic. Warner's speed and precision matched against Varos's raw power, the two combatants trading blows that shook the ground. Around them, the remnants of their forces watched in awe, the outcome of the war hanging on this final confrontation. In the end, it was Warner's adaptability that proved decisive, using his suit's advanced systems. He overloaded Varos's exosuit, the power core erupting in a blinding explosion. When the smoke cleared, the Emperor lay defeated, his golden armor tarnished and broken. Warner stood over him, breathing heavily. "This is for every world you enslaved," he said, before turning away. As the human forces secured the city, Warner looked up at the sky, where the stars seemed brighter than ever. The Empire was no more, and the galaxy stood on the brink of a new era, one forged in the fires of their resistance. But as Warner gazed at the horizon, he knew the war had left scars that might never heal. "We've won the battle," he murmured, "but the fight for the future has just begun."